Welcome back to Stay in Your Lane. I'm your host, John Maley, brought to you by Triple T Transport. Today we have the fortunate opportunity of having Keith Moore join us and help us on a very, very hot topic that everyone's been talking about for months and months here and trying to figure out an impact. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce everyone to Keith Moore. He is the CEO of AutoScheduler.AI, which I read earlier was a top 3 startup company. Keith, I read your bio on LinkedIn, and it's impressive. And I've talked to multiple people that shared their opinions and thoughts of you. So we asked you to join us on the podcast today, and I want to share for everyone else in transportation and logistics, what does AI mean to all of us? So if you would, Keith, kind of share with our listeners and our viewers what your background has been up to this point.
Yeah, happy to do that. And thank you so much for having me on. So as you mentioned, my name is Keith Moore. I'm the CEO of AutoScheduler. I'm based in Austin, Texas, actually. So I moved out here over a decade ago. And so graduated mechanical engineer at University of Tennessee. I was a passable engineer, but I won't ever say I was the best engineer out there. And I came to work for a test and measurement company called National Instruments. They were actually just recently acquired by Emerson. And part of what I did there is I went into product management pretty early in my career. So I did some engineering work and moved into product management, did what was called data acquisition. So I helped manage products that were responsible for collecting data from a variety of physical systems. Think of like sensors, your temperature, pressure, vibration sensors. And I was doing all this work with really cool companies. So I would work with like Qualcomm on their chipset testing, or Intel on how they could make cell phone batteries last longer. Or in particular, kind of where I had my aha moment was I was working with SpaceX on some of their control systems and what they call hardware in the loop testing for some of their self-landing rockets. And I realized that I was helping people generate all of this data. We were talking about gigabytes per second from just a few sensors, and there are thousands of sensors on these aircraft. And nobody actually knew what to do with all the data that they were generating. So I started to think, this was probably back in 2013, 2014, pretty early in my career, there needs to be some better way to handle this mass amount of data so that people can make good, insightful decisions instead of what most people were doing at the time, was just kind of throwing most of it away, taking a few key points and making decisions off of those. And so I started to read up on what was called machine learning at the time. And it was a field that was starting to emerge. And I said, you know what, I want to go do that. I want to go help some company bring machine learning to the forefront and really further what eventually became artificial intelligence. And I'm using air quotes for the folks that couldn't see. And try to further that and give people the ability to handle massive amounts of data. I joined on as one of the early employees at a company here in Austin called Spark Cognition. It was a pure play AI company, which was how could we take this technology and bring it to market in a variety of different verticals and industries, primarily focused on energy, oil, and gas. And so did the whole, if you've ever seen the show Silicon Valley, that was kind of my life for a while with our leadership team. So raised Series A, Series B, Series C. Eventually the company went on to become a unicorn, managed products for them. So kind of ran that whole team on what do we develop, what industries do we go after, how do we take this cool field of mathematics and apply it to predictive maintenance problems, apply it to building better strategies for a hedge fund, and really cut my teeth on building out machine learning solutions there. And then to kind of round out the story of how I got here, which is I grew up in warehousing before I ever went to school. My family's been in supply chain for a long time, and I've kind of learned a few things along the way. And I got to talking with my dad, who had been a consultant for some of the major consumer goods companies out there in the world. And he and I decided that we were actually going to go launch a business together called AutoScheduler. So we did that in 2020, and we've been growing like crazy ever since.
See, in 2013, 2014, we weren't there. I wasn't there, right? So when people say AI, that's like a big cast net, right?
Mm-hmm.
In relation to what and to what your goals are, and to where does it really work, where doesn't it, where is software just as good, and you don't need to justify an expenditure. We're going to break this down and understand. First off, at a fundamental level, we know AI is not new as a whole, right? I mean, this it's
Right.
6, 8, 10 years, but from an
I would say
applic
60. Yeah.
60. Okay,
Believe it or
so
believe it or not. Yeah.
yeah, so but all of a sudden, it's the buzz, right?
Hmm.
So let's try and help me. Why don't you try and educate and help me understand what has changed in the past couple of years, or 5 or 10 years?
Where when you think about AI, right, the concept's not new. It's AI is the artificial intelligence. It is, can you replicate human behavior and activity in a non-human entity? Really simply put, right? Can you algorithmically or mathematically, and a lot of it is really mathematics. Even some of the really cool modern Chat GPT, Mid Journey, generative modeling. It's all mathematics under the hood. And uh, can you do that effectively? But when you talk about kind of the evolution of why it's all of a sudden popular, even 50, 60 years ago, and I don't know the actual time, right? The Turing test was a thing, right? Which is, can you trick a person into thinking that a non-person is a person? That is the concept of a Turing test. So the actual concept of AI has been around for a really long time. But what changed technologically is, computers have come a really long way. You look at Moore's law, which I have no affiliation with whatsoever, but Moore's law started to break a little bit over the past few years, but your ability to compute has gotten cheaper and cheaper every single year. And you look at the confluence of all these things. So in 99, the late 90s, early 2000s, software became the new thing, right? Software is eating the world. You hear about that. But that computation's come a long way. Software became a big thing just as, in the 2000s. That's where businesses were really launched. And when software became much more common, you started to see emergence of new technologies like cloud. So, cloud compute was now something which is, not everybody needs to have your PC or your laptop or your desktop at your on your workstation. You can actually do a lot of the heavy compute you want to do elsewhere. And when cloud's available, you all of a sudden realize that instead of having terabytes of storage that I'm keeping on disk drives here, I can go store that somewhere else. And so big data becomes a thing where I can all of a sudden go and start to collect all this data, and I can go and do what's called the IoT movement, which is the Internet of Things. Is like, how can we sensorize more and more things so we get more information about it, so we can collect that data and use it intelligently. And so the next big kind of step is, okay, I now have the compute to handle everything because I can scale that much better in a big data center than I can at my desk. I now have the ability to collect more data than I ever could. Sensor technology has gotten cheap enough where I can go put a sensor on anything I want. You look at data in trucks, you're getting more data than ever before, and there are whole companies that are just dedicated to getting, I'm going to have a sensor on every single pallet that tells me, what the vibration quality was, what the temperature of that pallet is, how many times it's been touched. There's all this data now that you can start to collect. The next evolution really logically is, what do we do? Like, so what?
What do you do with all the information?
What decisions do you make off of it? And that's where artificial intelligence started to kind of fill it. It's the same story as my personal career. It's what is the next thing you should do, and the next thing is, how do we use all this to our advantage and make better decisions? And that is why AI started to come back in the early 2010s and is still, I mean, definitely roaring strong today.
Well, I know if you're buying something online or you're looking for customer support help on with so many companies, you're getting a computer. You ask a question and they can't compute and give you the answer, but they're giving you the pad, and it's a computer you're talking to. You're not talking to a
Mm-hmm.
person. So I think that is probably the most relatable for most people, to think of AI
Mm-hmm.
at some level, right? But
Yeah.
then, you know, then now, what form of AI would that be? Let me ask that question.
It depends what it's doing. And this is where when you get it, like when you break AI into categories, there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice the categories of AI. And I'm certainly not an academic. I do not have a doctorate in this space. But the ones that I generally prefer to do are you can break things into what are called AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which is like Terminator, that's Skynet. The world's not there yet. And then you have what's called narrow AI, which is artificial intelligence applications that are vertically good at doing one thing really well. And this is a very proven business case where you can scale this to a business and you can build whole businesses around it. It is a series of mathematics and algorithms that do certain things very well. So when you're talking to something and it is an automated system, that is going to be a narrow AI, right? All it does is it handles some support questions for you. But that narrow AI over the past year or two has gotten really good, which I don't know. Have you ever used technology called Chat GPT, or have you heard of Chat GPT?
Heard of it. I haven't used it personally.
Yes. There's been a new field that's kind of emerged in narrow AI called generative modeling. And historically, most AI applications in this narrow space were to better describe what was actually happening, predict what was going to happen, or prescribe what you should do about it, or help you make decisions. And where generative modeling is really interesting is it can start to create as well, which is it will take things that have never existed before and create. You talk about AI driven art, AI stories, right? I have plenty of examples where my 5-year-old son wants to read Frankenstein, which is not an appropriate story for a 5-year-old. And so I can go and ask these generative models, can you take Frankenstein and make it appropriate for a 5-year-old? And I get a story out of it that I can then read him that does not involve many of the horrible things that are in that book. And so these narrow AI and these generative models that are coming on are kind of the most recent evolution of artificial intelligence in replicating what people can do, particularly on the support side. But to answer your initial question, most of the time when you have the please say yes or no, that is a really simple model that is just recognizing what you're saying and it's sending you down what's called a decision tree. Did he say
Right.
yes? Did he say no? So it's a very simple type of model today in most places.
I can appreciate what you're saying because you're helping me understand it. For me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people out there that are willing to admit it, we have not been in the field that you've been in and haven't had the exposure to everything you have. We may be enamored by it, but we may not really understand applicationally what it is and how it works. So thank you for that. On our next episode, I want to get a little deeper. Okay. I want to get into where do you see this going in transportation? Who's out of a job?
Sure.
Who's not out of a job? Some of that predicting, some of the armchair quarterback, that type of stuff. So what I'll do is I'm gonna thank you.
Any of those, I'm happy to answer. I won't promise to have all the answers, but I think there is there are a lot of things in different timelines that will disrupt some of those areas.
I would agree with that.
Continue watching on the next episode of the Stay in Your Lane podcast.